The barber's tremor. Vincent's hands shook as he wrapped the hot towel around Mr. Benedetto's weathered face. 35 years of cutting hair, and the tremor still came every February 14th, like clockwork, like guilt. "Easy there, Vinny," Benedetto mumbled through the steam. "You're wound tighter than a spring today." Vincent forced a smile, the same practiced expression he'd worn for decades in this cramped Little Italy barber shop. Red leather chair from 1952, cracked mirror that distorted faces just enough to hide secrets, the smell of bay rum and old sins. Just the cold getting to these old bones, Vincent lied, steadying his grip on the straight razor. The weight of it felt familiar, dangerous, different from the gun Capone had pressed into his palm that night, but dangerous all the same. Don't think about it, not today, but February 14th never let him forget. He began the careful work of shaving, each stroke deliberate, controlled. Benedetto was a regular, came in every Tuesday for 20 years, always ordered the same cut, always tipped exactly 15%. Predictable, safe, the kind of customer who never asked questions about the faded newspaper clipping taped behind the register, the one from 1929 that most people assumed was just neighborhood nostalgia. The bell above the door chimed. Vincent glanced up to see a young woman enter, maybe 25, with auburn hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his shop. She carried a leather messenger bag and wore the kind of confident smile that set off alarm bells in Vincent's head. "I'll be with you in a moment, miss," he called out, not liking how she studied the old photographs on his walls. Pictures of the neighborhood, of customers, of a life carefully constructed to look ordinary. She nodded, settling into the waiting area. But her attention wasn't on the magazines. It was on him. Vincent's hand paused mid-stroke. In the mirror, he caught her reflection, and for a split second, something in her jawline reminded him of, "No, you're being paranoid. It's just the date." He finished Benedetto's shave in silence, his movements mechanical while his mind raced. 64 years old, and he still jumped at shadows. Still heard Capone's voice in quiet moments. "You know what happens to loose ends, kid. They get snipped. There you go, Mr. B," Vincent said, whisking away the towel with a flourish, sharp enough to cut glass. Benedetto examined his reflection, running fingers along his smooth jawline. "Beautiful work, as always. Same time next week? Wouldn't miss it." After Benedetto left, Vincent found himself alone with the woman. She stood, smoothing down a wool coat that probably cost more than Vincent made in a month. "Vincent Torino?" Her voice carried a slight accent, Irish maybe. "I'm Claire Moran. I called yesterday about the interview?" Vincent's blood turned to slush. Moran. That name hit him like a punch to the gut, dragging up memories of smoke and screaming, of bodies in a warehouse that the papers got all wrong. "Interview?" He kept his voice steady, professional. "I think you've got me confused with someone else, miss. I just cut hair." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm making a documentary about Chicago's history. Specifically, about what really happened on February 14th, 1929. I have reason to believe you might have some insights." The straight razor trembled in Vincent's grip. She couldn't know. No one knew. He'd made sure of that, buried the truth so deep that even he sometimes convinced himself it was just a nightmare. "Lady, I was born in 1959. I don't know nothing about ancient history." "Really?" Claire reached into her messenger bag, and Vincent's instinct screamed danger. But instead of a weapon, she pulled out a manila folder. "Because I have a birth certificate here that says Vincent Anthony Torino was born December 3rd, 1910. Which would make you 19 in 1929, the perfect age for someone looking to make his mark in Capone's organization." The folder hit the barber chair with a soft thud. Vincent stared at it like it might explode. "I also have witness statements," Claire continued, her voice gentle but relentless, "police reports that were buried, and a photograph that I think you'll find very interesting." She opened the folder, revealing a grainy black and white image. 5 men in expensive coats walking into a building, and behind them, barely visible in the shadows, a young face that Vincent recognized with sickening clarity, his own face. 19 years old, and stupid enough to believe he was untouchable. The thing about secrets, Mr. Torino, Claire said, is that they always find their way to the surface, even after 94 years. Vincent looked up from the photograph, meeting her eyes for the first time. What he saw there wasn't curiosity or academic interest. It was hunger, the kind of hunger that got people killed. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered. Claire Moran's smile turned predatory. "I'm someone who knows what you did, and I'm here to make sure the world knows too." The straight razor clattered to the floor, its blade catching the afternoon light like a silver accusation. Vincent stared at the photograph, at his own young, arrogant face emerging from shadows that should have stayed buried forever. "You need to leave." His voice came out rougher than sandpaper. "Now." Claire Moran didn't move. If anything, she seemed to settle deeper into the red leather chair, crossing her legs with the casual confidence of someone holding all the cards. "We both know I'm not going anywhere until we talk, Mr. Torino. The question is whether we do this the easy way or—" "There ain't no easy way." Vincent's hands found the familiar comfort of his workstation, fingers tracing the worn handles of combs and scissors like rosary beads. "What you're talking about. People died for less. People died, period." Her voice carried an edge now, the polite facade cracking. 7 men in a warehouse, gunned down like dogs. And the world thinks it was about territory, about Bugs Moran stepping on Al Capone's toes. The shop felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Outside, Mrs. Castellano walked her ancient poodle past the window, same route she'd taken every day for the past decade. Normal life, continuing its gentle rhythm while Vincent's carefully constructed world threatened to collapse. "The world thinks a lot of things," he said carefully. "Don't make 'em true." Claire opened the folder wider, revealing more documents. Police reports with whole sections blacked out, witness statements that read like Swiss cheese. And underneath it all, a family photograph. A man with Claire's jawline standing next to a woman holding a baby. "George Bugs Moran was my great-grandfather," she said quietly. "He died believing Capone killed his people over some petty gang war. But you and I both know it wasn't about territory, was it, Vincent?" The old man's knees nearly buckled. Moran's blood. Christ, she had Moran's blood running through her veins, and here she sat in his shop, 3 feet from where he'd trimmed the hair of judges and politicians and ordinary men who'd never hurt a soul. "My great-grandfather spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder," Claire continued, her voice soft but relentless. "Died broken, convinced he'd failed his men. But he didn't fail them, did he? Someone else did. Someone who fed information to Capone. Someone who made sure Moran's boys would be in that warehouse at exactly the right time." Vincent's reflection stared back at him from the cracked mirror. 64 years old, liver spots and deep lines, hands that shook with more than guilt. When had he gotten so old? When had the weight of secrets carved such valleys in his face? "You don't understand," he whispered. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Nobody was supposed to die." The admission hung in the air between them like smoke. Claire leaned forward, and Vincent could see the hunger in her eyes intensify. Not just for truth, but for justice, for blood. "Then tell me how it was supposed to happen," she said. "Tell me about the 5 bosses who laughed at Capone. Tell me what you did to help him get his revenge." A car backfired outside, and Vincent flinched hard enough to knock over a bottle of bay rum. The sharp scent flooded the shop, overwhelming and immediate, dragging him back to that warehouse, to the smell of cordite and copper and fear. "I can't." His voice broke on the words. "I got family. My daughter, she's got kids. My grandson Tony, he's a good cop, clean, everything I never was. They don't know. They can't know." "They will if this goes public," Claire said matter-of-factly. "And it will go public, Mr. Torino. The only question is whether they hear it from me or from you." Vincent closed his eyes, seeing faces. Maria, his daughter, with her mother's gentle eyes and stubborn chin. She visited every Sunday, brought the grandkids for haircuts and stories about the old neighborhood. Tommy, 8 years old, who called him Nano and believed he was the strongest man in the world. And Tony, Detective Antonio Torino, who wore his badge like armor and had no idea his grandfather's hands were stained with blood older than his lifetime. "What do you want?" Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer. "The truth." Claire's smile returned, predatory and patient. Every detail, every name, everything that really happened before, during, and after February 14th, 1929. She reached into her bag again, this time producing a small digital recorder. The device looked alien in the old barber shop, all sleek lines and modern menace. We can start with how a 19-year-old barber became Al Capone's inside man, she said, finger hovering over the record button, and then you can tell me exactly how you helped him murder 7 innocent men. Outside, the afternoon light was already fading, casting long shadows across the shop floor. Soon, the familiar sounds of evening would begin. Families calling children home for dinner, the rumble of the L train carrying workers back to their safe suburban lives. Vincent looked at his reflection one last time, memorizing the face of the man he'd been before Claire Moran walked into his shop. Tomorrow, he'd be someone else entirely. The phone call. Vincent's finger trembled as it hovered over the recorder's stop button. Claire had given him the night to think, 24 hours to decide between confession and exposure. Now, as dawn light filtered through the barbershop windows, he realized there was a third option she hadn't considered. The bell above the door chimed before he could reach for his coat. Vincent's heart lurched, expecting to see Claire's determined face, but instead, a mountain of a man filled the doorway. Sal Benedetto, not the elderly customer from yesterday, but his nephew, the one who worked for people who didn't advertise their services. "Morning, Mr. Torino." Sal's voice carried the particular politeness that preceded violence. "Beautiful day, ain't it?" "Shop's closed, Sal." Vincent's hand drifted toward the scissors on his workstation. Fat lot of good they'd do against Sal's bulk. "Come back this afternoon." "See, that's the thing." Sal stepped inside, turning the deadbolt with deliberate care. "My associates heard you had a visitor yesterday. Pretty lady, asking questions about old times." The bottom dropped out of Vincent's stomach. After 94 years, the ghosts were finally comparing notes. Just a customer, Vincent lied. Wanted a trim for her wedding. Sal's laugh had all the warmth of a morgue drawer sliding shut. "Funny thing about lies, Mr. T, they got a way of multiplying. Like cancer." Behind the register, Vincent's ancient rotary phone began to ring. The sound cut through the tension like a cleaver through bone, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. Both men stared at it as it rang once, twice, 3 times. "You gonna answer that?" Sal asked. Vincent's legs felt like water, but he forced himself to move. The phone's receiver weighed 1,000 pounds in his trembling grip. Torino's. "Grandpa Vinny?" The voice hit him like a physical blow. Tommy, his 8-year-old great-grandson, scared and crying. "Some lady took Mama. She said to call you. She said—" The boy's voice dissolved into sobs. Vincent's vision tunneled. The barber shop, Sal's threatening presence, the weight of 94 years of secrets, everything faded to white noise around Tommy's frightened voice. "Tommy, where are you? Where's your mama?" "The warehouse," Tommy whispered. "The scary one with all the broken windows. She said you'd know which one. She said to tell you that history's gonna repeat itself unless you come alone." The line went dead. Vincent stared at the receiver like it had turned into a snake. Claire Moran hadn't just come for the truth. She'd come for blood, his family's blood, payment for her great-grandfather's men. Problem? Sal's voice seemed to come from very far away. "My daughter." Vincent's voice cracked. "She's got my daughter." "Who's got your daughter?" "Moran's great-granddaughter." The words tumbled out before Vincent could stop them. "She knows about 29. About the warehouse, about everything." Sal's expression shifted from mild menace to sharp attention. "Bugs Moran's blood is in Chicago, and you didn't think to mention this? I thought I could handle it." Vincent laughed, a sound like breaking glass. 94 years old, and I thought I could handle one college girl with a recorder. Behind them, the barbershop's radio crackled to life. Vincent had forgotten he'd left it on the police scanner frequency. A habit from the old days when knowing what the cops were doing meant the difference between freedom and a cell. Detective Antonio Torino's voice cut through the static, professional, and urgent. "Unit 47 requesting backup at the old Gusenberg warehouse district. We've got a possible kidnapping, adult female, child witness on scene. Tony." His grandson, the cop, was already there, already walking into whatever trap Claire had set. Vincent's last hope of containing this nightmare was about to get his own flesh and blood killed. Jesus Christ, Sal breathed. Your cop grandson's walking into this blind. Vincent was already moving, muscle memory from a different life taking over. His hands found the loose floorboard behind the chair, fingers closing around the weight he'd hidden there 70 years ago. The gun was older than most of the buildings in the neighborhood, but Vincent had cleaned it religiously, maintained it like a rosary. Some habits died hard. You can't go in there with that, Sal said. Place'll be crawling with cops in 10 minutes. Then I better hurry. Vincent checked the cylinder. 6 bullets, same as always. Enough for what needed doing. Tell your associates Vincent Torino paid his debts. All of them. He was halfway to the door when Sal's voice stopped him. For what it's worth, old man, we always respected what you did. Keeping your mouth shut all these years. A lot of men would have cracked. Vincent paused at the threshold, looking back at the barber shop one last time. 35 years of cutting hair, of building a normal life on top of extraordinary sins. Tomorrow, if there was a tomorrow, the newspapers would tell a different story about Vincent Torino. But tonight, he was 19 again, and Al Capone was whispering in his ear about loose ends. Time to tie them off. Early development. The February wind cut through Vincent's coat like it had teeth, but he barely felt the cold. His arthritic fingers gripped the steering wheel of his ancient Buick as he navigated the familiar streets toward the warehouse district, each turn bringing him deeper into a maze of memories he'd spent decades trying to forget. Maybe you can still walk away, whispered the voice of self-preservation. Call Tony. Tell him everything. Let the cops handle this. But Vincent knew better. Claire Moran hadn't chosen that warehouse by accident. The place where her great-grandfather's men had died, where Vincent's 19-year-old hands had unlocked the back door and walked away whistling, while 7 men bled out on concrete that still bore their stains. History repeating itself, she'd said. The scanner crackled again, more units responding to Tony's call. Vincent reached over and switched it off. He couldn't bear to hear his grandson's voice right now, couldn't stand the thought of Tony walking into this clean and unsuspecting while Vincent carried 94 years of poison in his veins. Should have told him years ago, should have told them all. But how do you explain to a good cop that his grandfather had been the key to Chicago's most infamous massacre? How do you look your daughter in the eye and say you'd helped murder 7 men for the price of respect and an envelope full of blood money? Vincent's hands started shaking harder as he turned onto Warehouse Row. The old industrial buildings loomed like tombstones in the gray afternoon light, most of them empty since the factories moved south in the 80s. Only one showed signs of recent activity. Police cars clustered around its entrance like antibodies around an infection. He parked 3 blocks away, checking the gun one more time before sliding it into his coat pocket. The weight felt familiar, comforting in a way that made him sick. Some muscle memory never faded, no matter how many years you spent pretending to be someone else. The warehouse's broken windows stared down at him like dead eyes as he approached from the rear. Same building, same loading dock where he'd met Capone's driver that February night. Vincent could almost smell the cordite, hear the echo of gunshots that had shattered more than just 7 lives. Bugs Moran's boys trusted you, the old guilt whispered. Called you Vinny the barber. Bought you drinks, told you their plans like you were family, and he'd smiled and nodded and passed every word to Al Capone's eager ears. A figure moved in the shadows near the loading dock, not a cop, too careful for that. Vincent's heart hammered as recognition dawned. Mickey Torino, his own nephew, the one who'd followed Vincent's path into darker waters but never learned when to get out. Mickey? Vincent called softly. The younger man spun around, face pale with fear. Uncle Vinny? Jesus, what are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing. But Vincent already knew. Mickey worked for the Benedetto family now, which meant Sal's associates had decided Vincent was too big a risk to leave breathing. They send you to clean up their mess? Mickey's hand twitched toward his jacket. It ain't personal, Uncle Vinny. It's just that Moran girl, she's got evidence. Photos, documents, stuff that could hurt a lot of important people. So, you're gonna kill her? I'm gonna do what needs doing. Mickey's voice cracked like a teenager's. Same as you did back in 29. The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. Mickey knew. His own flesh and blood knew about the warehouse, about Capone, about all of it. How many others had figured it out over the years? How many had stayed quiet out of fear or respect, or simple self-preservation? Who told you? Vincent asked. Does it matter? Mickey pulled his gun, a sleek modern thing that made Vincent's antique look like a museum piece. The old rules don't apply anymore, Uncle Vinny. Too many people asking questions, too many loose ends. From inside the warehouse came the sound of sirens growing closer. Tony's backup, probably. Good cops walking into a situation they couldn't possibly understand, where the victims and villains wore faces they'd trusted their whole lives. My daughter's in there, Vincent said quietly. My great-grandson saw her taken. You gonna shoot me while my family's in danger? Mickey's gun wavered. She don't have to get hurt. The Moran girl just wants you. Wants the truth about what really happened. We give her that. Everyone else walks away clean. And you believe that? I believe in staying alive. Mickey's young face looked ancient in the warehouse shadows. Something you never taught me how to do. Vincent understood then. This wasn't just about Claire Moran or her documentary, or even the secret that had shaped his entire life. This was about the infection he'd carried all these years. The way guilt and fear had poisoned everything he'd touched, everyone he'd loved. The sins of the grandfather, visited upon the sons. You're right, Vincent said, stepping closer. I never did teach you properly. Then he moved. The old reflexes kicked in like muscle memory from a nightmare. Vincent's hand found Mickey's wrist before the younger man could react, decades of accumulated guilt translating into desperate strength. The gun went off, bullets sparking off concrete, and both men crashed against the loading dock's rusted railing. Uncle Vinny. Don't. But Vincent was already twisting, using Mickey's momentum against him the way Capone's enforcers had taught him 94 years ago. Some lessons carved themselves so deep they became part of your bones. Mickey hit the ground hard, wind knocked out of him, gun skittering into the shadows between two dumpsters. Vincent stood over his nephew, his own blood, and felt the full weight of what he'd become. Not just a barber who'd made a mistake in 1929, a cancer that had been metastasizing through his family for generations. How long have you known? Vincent asked, his own gun steady in his shaking hands. Mickey coughed, tasting blood. Since I was 16. Found some old papers in your basement when Ma sent me to get the Christmas decorations. Newspaper clippings, a letter from Capone's lawyer. That envelope full of money you never spent. Vincent's stomach dropped. The envelope. Christ, he'd forgotten about the envelope. Capone's payment for services rendered, 30 pieces of silver that Vincent had hidden away like evidence of his own damnation. He'd meant to destroy it 100 times, but somehow he'd always found excuses. Maybe he'd wanted to be caught. Maybe he'd wanted someone to know. You kept it all these years, Mickey continued, struggling to sit up, like some kind of shrine to your guilt. You think that makes you a good man? Feeling bad about what you did? I think it makes me human. Tell that to the 7 guys bleeding out in there. Mickey nodded toward the warehouse. Tell that to Bugs Moran's family, wondering why their father died thinking he'd failed his men. From inside the building came the sound of voices, police commands, careful footsteps, the methodical clearing of rooms. Tony was in there somewhere, following procedure, doing everything by the book while his grandfather's sins waited in the shadows like landmines. She's got Maria tied up in the old foreman's office, Mickey said quietly. The Moran girl. Says she wants to recreate the whole scene, make you confess where your victims died. Vincent's daughter, bound and helpless while her father's past came calling with interest compounded over nearly a century. The weight of it threatened to crush him, not just the original sin, but the endless ripple effects. Every Christmas dinner, every birthday party, every moment of normal family happiness built on a foundation of 7 dead men. How many others know? Vincent asked. About you specifically? Maybe a dozen. But Uncle Vinny, Mickey's voice carried a desperate edge. Everyone knows something happened that night. Something more than the official story. The families, they've been waiting all these years for it to come out. And now, it has. Now it has, Mickey agreed. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Vincent looked at his nephew, really looked at him. Mickey had his mother's eyes, Vincent's own jawline, the Torino's stubborn streak that had gotten 3 generations into trouble. Another victim of choices made before he was born. "I'm gonna finish it," Vincent said. He helped Mickey to his feet, both men understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them. The old man's authority, built on secrets and fear and carefully maintained distance, was crumbling. In its place stood only the terrible equality of shared knowledge. "The cops will be here soon," Mickey said, retrieving his gun. "Too many witnesses, too much attention. This can't end the old way. Maybe that's for the best." They moved toward the warehouse entrance together, past police barriers that meant nothing to men who'd been breaking different laws for decades. Vincent could hear Tony's voice now, professional and controlled, directing his officers through the building's maze of corridors and abandoned machinery. His grandson, the detective, clean, honest, everything Vincent had failed to be. In a few minutes, Tony would learn that his family tree was rooted in massacre, that the old man who'd bounced him on his knee and taught him to shave had blood under his fingernails that no amount of time could wash clean. "You could still run," Mickey said softly. "Leave town, start over somewhere else. You're 94. How long could they chase you?" Vincent thought about it for maybe half a second. Then he pictured Maria tied up in that office, probably terrified, definitely innocent of everything except the crime of being his daughter. Tommy, 8 years old and already traumatized by witnessing his mother's kidnapping. Tony, about to walk into an ambush of truth that would destroy everything he believed about his family. "No," Vincent said, checking his gun one last time. "Running's what got us here." He pushed open the warehouse's side door, and the smell hit him immediately. Rust and decay and something underneath that might have been old blood. The ghosts were waiting for him, patient as stone, ready to collect on a debt that had been accumulating interest since 1929. Time to pay up. The warehouse interior was a tomb of rusted machinery and broken dreams, but Vincent's feet found their way through the darkness like he'd never left. Past the conveyor belts where honest men had once earned honest wages, around the support pillars that had witnessed honest labor before they'd been baptized in blood and betrayal. Mickey stayed close behind him, their footsteps echoing off concrete that remembered everything. Vincent could hear Tony's voice getting closer, professional and careful, leading his team through the building's skeletal remains. Any moment now, the grandson would meet the grandfather in the place where innocence went to die. They reached the foreman's office, and Vincent's blood turned to ice water. Maria sat bound to a chair in the center of the room, duct tape across her mouth, eyes wide with terror and confusion. But it wasn't his daughter that made Vincent's world tilt sideways. It was the woman standing behind her, no longer playing the role of eager documentary filmmaker. Claire Moran had shed her graduate student disguise like a snake shedding skin. Gone was the nervous enthusiasm, the careful deference, the wide-eyed hunger for historical truth. In its place stood something harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. "Hello, Vincent," she said, and her voice carried an accent he hadn't noticed before. Irish, like her great-grandfather's. "Thank you for coming. We have so much to discuss." "Let my daughter go," Vincent said, raising his gun. "This is between you and me." Claire laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Is it? Because I've been watching your family for 15 years, Vincent. 15 years of learning your routines, your relationships, your precious little secrets. Did you really think I was just some college girl who stumbled onto your story?" The words hit him like physical blows. 15 years. She'd been planning this since before Tommy was born, since before Maria had even met her husband. Every casual encounter, every coincidental meeting. The documentary was just cover, Vincent realized. You never cared about the truth. "Oh, but I do care about truth," Claire said, circling Maria's chair like a predator. "The truth is that my great-grandfather died thinking he'd failed his men. Died believing he couldn't protect the people who trusted him. Do you know what that kind of guilt does to a family, Vincent? How it poisons every generation that comes after?" Mickey shifted beside him, gun drawn but uncertain. "Lady, this is getting out of hand." "Shut up, Mickey," Claire snapped, not taking her eyes off Vincent. "Yes, I know who you are too. The nephew who followed in Uncle Vinny's footsteps. except you never learned when to stop digging. Vincent's mind reeled. She knew Mickey, knew their family dynamics, knew things no outsider should know. How long have you been watching us? Since I was 12 and found my great-grandfather's journals, Claire said. Since I read about the inside man who sold out 7 good men for Capone's blood money. Since I swore an oath on Bugs Moran's grave that I'd make things right. From the corridor outside came the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy boots, radio chatter, Tony's voice coordinating his team. Vincent felt the walls closing in, not just of the warehouse but of his entire carefully constructed life. Your great-grandfather was a killer, Vincent said desperately. A bootlegger, a criminal. He was a man who honored his commitments, Claire cut him off, who protected his people, who kept his word. Unlike some people. She moved closer to Maria, and Vincent saw his daughter's eyes fill with tears above the duct tape. Maria, who'd spent 43 years believing her father was just a barber, just a quiet old man with steady hands and endless patience. Soon she'd learn what those hands had really done, what foundation her entire life had been built on. Here's what's going to happen, Claire continued. Your grandson, the detective, is going to walk through that door in about 30 seconds. He's going to find his family here, all 3 generations of Torinos, and you're going to tell him the truth, every detail, every bloody, shameful, cowardly detail. And if I don't? Claire's smile was arctic. Then Maria learns what happens to people who trust the wrong family. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. Vincent heard Tony's voice, low and cautious, movement inside. Going in. In that crystalline moment before everything shattered, Vincent finally understood the true scope of his damnation. It wasn't just the 7 men he'd helped kill in 1929. It was every day since then, every smile, every family dinner, every time he'd let his children and grandchildren love a man who didn't deserve their devotion. The door swung open, and Detective Antonio Torino stepped into the light, weapon drawn, professional and clean, and utterly unprepared for what he was about to learn about the blood in his veins. Chicago PD, Tony announced, then stopped dead as he saw the tableau before him. Grandpa? Maria? What the hell? Tell him, Claire commanded, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Tell your grandson who you really are, Vincent Torino. Tell him what you did to make Al Capone laugh. Vincent's mouth opened, but no words came. How do you confess to 94 years of lies in a single breath? How do you watch your grandson's world collapse in real time while your daughter's eyes plead for an explanation that will only make everything worse? Grandpa? Tony's voice cracked, the professional mask slipping to reveal the confused boy underneath. What's she talking about? Claire stepped forward, never taking her eyes off Vincent. Your grandfather was Al Capone's inside man, detective. He fed information to the outfit about my great-grandfather's operations. The St. Valentine's Day massacre wasn't about territory or revenge. It was about silencing the 5 bosses who laughed at Capone during his first commission meeting. Your precious family patriarch helped orchestrate the murder of 7 men. Tony's gun wavered between Claire and Vincent, training and family loyalty warring in his expression. That's impossible. Grandpa's been a barber his whole life. He's never even gotten a speeding ticket. Show him the envelope, Vincent, Claire said softly. The one Mickey found when he was 16. The one you've kept hidden in your basement like a trophy. Vincent felt Mickey's sharp intake of breath beside him. His nephew's betrayal cut deeper than Claire's accusations. Family blood spilling family secrets, the poison spreading to another generation. You told her? Vincent whispered. Mickey couldn't meet his eyes. She found me 3 years ago. Said she'd expose everything unless I helped her get close to the family. I thought maybe if we controlled how it came out. You thought wrong, Vincent said, understanding finally crystallizing. This wasn't random vengeance. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign spanning decades. Claire hadn't just stumbled onto his story. She'd systematically infiltrated his entire world. Tony lowered his weapon slightly, the pieces clicking together in his detective's mind. The documentary, the interviews. You've been gathering evidence. For 15 years, Claire confirmed. Photos, witness statements, financial records. Did you know your grandfather received $50,000 from Capone's organization? More money than a barber makes in a lifetime, just sitting in an account he never touched. Maria made a muffled sound behind the tape, her eyes darting between her father and son. Vincent could see the terrible arithmetic happening in her mind. Dates and timelines, inconsistencies she'd never questioned, the careful distance he'd always maintained from certain subjects. The money was blood money, Vincent said quietly, his voice barely audible. I never spent it because it was never mine to spend. Tony stared at him, and Vincent watched his grandson's face cycle through disbelief, confusion, and finally a dawning horror that made him look decades older. Jesus Christ, it's true, isn't it? Your grandfather was 19 when he started passing information to the outfit, Claire continued, her voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. Young, desperate, seduced by promises of respect and protection. But it wasn't just one betrayal, Detective. It was years of them. Every meeting, every plan, every moment of trust, all of it poisoned. Vincent's hands shook as he lowered his gun. What was the point of weapons now? The real damage had already been done, the truth spreading through the room like blood through water. They were going to kill me, Vincent said, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. Moran's boys suspected someone was talking. If I hadn't given Capone what he wanted, you would have died honorably, Claire finished, instead of spending 94 years as a living lie. Tony's radio crackled with his team's positions, officers securing the building's perimeter, waiting for his orders. Normal police business proceeding while his family's foundation crumbled around him. Vincent wondered if his grandson would arrest him when this was over, if duty would triumph over blood. The 5 bosses, Tony said slowly, his detective's mind working despite the emotional chaos. The ones who laughed at Capone, they were at the warehouse that day? Vincent nodded, memory dragging him back to that February morning. Capone convinced them to meet with Moran's people, said he had information about a liquor shipment, wanted to make peace. But it was a trap from the beginning, and you helped set it up. I told them where to be, Vincent whispered. When to be there, what route to take. Each word felt like swallowing glass. 7 men died because they trusted me. Maria's tears were flowing freely now, her bound hands clenched into fists. Vincent wanted to comfort her, to explain that every choice he'd made since had been to protect their family, to build something clean from the ashes of his sins. But how do you explain that love built on lies isn't really love at all? Claire moved to the window, looking out at the police cars surrounding the building. Your team's getting restless, Detective. They'll be coming in soon, and when they do, they'll find 3 generations of Torinos and 1 very determined great-granddaughter of Bugs Moran. The question is, what story will you tell them? Tony looked at his grandfather, and Vincent saw something break in his grandson's eyes. Not just disappointment, but the terrible understanding that nothing would ever be the same. The point of no return had finally arrived. Climax. Vincent Torino looked at his grandson's shattered expression and felt the last of his strength crumble. 94 years of careful construction, the quiet barber, the devoted family man, the gentle grandfather, all of it dissolving in the fluorescent warehouse light like salt in tears. Tony, he said softly, holstering his weapon. I need you to understand something before this goes any further. Understand what? Tony's voice was raw, barely controlled. That my entire life has been built on corpses? That every bedtime story, every birthday, every moment I looked up to you was a lie? Claire watched from beside Maria's chair, her triumph evident but strangely hollow. She'd waited 15 years for this moment, orchestrated every detail, but now that it was happening, Vincent could see something like regret flicker across her features. The money, Vincent continued, his words cutting through Tony's anguish. The 50,000 Claire mentioned. It's still there, every penny. With interest, it's worth nearly $500,000 now. Blood money, Mickey whispered. Moran's family's money, Vincent corrected, looking directly at Claire. I always knew it would have to go back someday. I was just too much of a coward to give it back myself. Claire's composure cracked slightly. You think money fixes 7 murders? You think... I think nothing fixes 7 murders, Vincent said, moving slowly toward his daughter. But I also think vengeance doesn't heal wounds, Claire. It just creates new ones. Tony's radio crackled again, his team growing restless, following protocol while their leader faced the collapse of everything he believed in. Vincent could hear the controlled breathing, the professional patience wearing thin. "Sir?" came a voice through the static. "We have the building secured." "Status?" Tony stared at the radio for a long moment, then at his grandfather, then at Claire. When he spoke into the device, his voice was steady despite the chaos in his eyes. "Stand down. Give me 5 more minutes." "Copy that, detective." The silence that followed was deafening. Maria struggled against her restraints, muffled sounds of distress that cut through Vincent like knives. He moved toward her, but Claire raised her hand. "Stay back. We're not finished." "Yes, we are," Vincent said quietly. "This was never about justice, Claire. It was about making someone else feel the pain your family carried. But pain shared isn't pain halved. It's just more pain." "My great-grandfather died thinking he was a failure," Claire shot back, but the fire was going out of her voice. He died believing he was a good man who'd made bad choices," Vincent interrupted. "Just like I've lived believing I was a bad man trying to make good choices. Neither of us was entirely right." Tony stepped forward, his detective's instincts finally overriding his personal trauma. "Claire, you need to untie my sister. Whatever grievance you have, whatever justice you think you deserve, this isn't the way." "Justice?" Claire laughed bitterly. "There is no justice for what happened. There's only truth and the reckoning that comes with it." Vincent saw his moment and took it. Not with violence. He was too old for that, and there had been enough violence already. Instead, he did something that had taken him 94 years to learn how to do properly. He told the complete truth. "Claire's right about everything," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I was Capone's inside man. I helped plan the massacre. 7 good men died because I was 19 and scared and stupid enough to think I could choose who lived and who died." Tony's face went white, but Vincent continued. "But she's wrong about one thing. I didn't spend 94 years as a living lie. I spent 94 years trying to earn the forgiveness I knew I'd never deserve. Every haircut, every kind word, every moment I spent being the grandfather you needed, that wasn't performance. That was penance." Maria's eyes met his over the duct tape, and Vincent saw something there that surprised him. Not hatred, not disappointment, understanding. His daughter, who'd inherited his stubborn streak and his capacity for unconditional love, was telling him without words that blood was thicker than secrets. Claire's hand trembled as she reached for the knife at her belt. "Pretty words don't bring back the dead." "No," Vincent agreed. "But ugly truths don't either. And that's all this is, Claire. Ugly truth wrapped in righteous anger, served 94 years cold." Tony moved then, faster than his grandfather had expected, faster than Claire had planned for. Years of police training took over, muscle memory overriding emotional chaos. He had Claire disarmed and on the ground before she could react, the knife skittering across the concrete floor. "It's over," Tony said, breathing hard as he secured her hands behind her back. "For all of us, it's finally over." But Vincent knew better. As he knelt to untie his daughter, as he watched his grandson do his duty despite the cost, as he felt the weight of decades finally lifting from his shoulders, he understood that nothing was really over. It was just beginning. Resolution. 3 weeks later, Vincent Torino sat alone in his barber shop at 6 a.m., watching the February sun struggle through the frost-covered windows of Little Italy. His hands, those same hands that had trembled with secrets for 94 years, were steady now as they polished the chrome on his oldest chair. The weight of hidden truth had been replaced by something heavier, the aftermath of honesty. The shop was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not the comfortable silence of early morning routine, but the hollow quiet of a place waiting to be abandoned. Tomorrow, the for sale sign would go up. Vincent had finally accepted what he'd known since that night in the warehouse. Some stains go too deep for even a lifetime of penance to wash clean. The bell above the door chimed, and Tony walked in. His grandson looked older, worn thin by 3 weeks of questioning, paperwork, and the impossible task of reconciling the grandfather he'd loved with the young man who'd helped orchestrate the St. Valentine's Day massacre. He wore his detective's badge, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd learned that justice and family rarely occupied the same space. "Maria's waiting in the car," Tony said, settling into the customer's chair without being asked. It had become their routine, these morning meetings where they tried to navigate the wreckage of their relationship. "She wants to say goodbye before you leave." Vincent nodded, not trusting his voice. His daughter had surprised him with her forgiveness, though he knew it came wrapped in a grief that would take years to process. She'd hugged him after the warehouse, held him while he wept, and whispered that she'd rather have a father who was honestly flawed than one who was perfectly fake. "How's Claire?" Vincent asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Arraigned yesterday. Her lawyer's pushing for a plea deal. Time served plus probation in exchange for her cooperation with the historical investigation." Tony's voice was professionally neutral, but Vincent could hear the exhaustion underneath. "She's not the same person we thought we knew." Vincent began sweeping the floor, muscle memory guiding him through motions he'd performed thousands of times. Each stroke of the broom felt like erasing another piece of the life he'd built in this place. None of us are, I suppose. The Chicago Tribune had run the story 3 days ago, Barber's 94-year secret, inside the real St. Valentine's Day massacre. The reporter had been respectful but thorough, painting Vincent as both perpetrator and victim of his own choices. The phone had rung constantly. Historians, crime buffs, distant relatives who suddenly remembered they had questions about Uncle Vinny's past. "The money," Tony said suddenly. "The blood money you never spent. The city's setting up a memorial fund with it, for families affected by organized crime." Vincent smiled sadly. It was fitting, somehow, Capone's bribes transformed into something that might actually help people. "Your idea?" "Claire's, actually. She suggested it during questioning. Said her great-grandfather would have appreciated the irony." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two men trying to figure out how to love each other across a chasm of revealed truth. Outside, Little Italy was waking up, shopkeepers unlocking doors, the first customers of the day hurrying past with coffee cups and newspapers. "The nursing home in Florida," Tony said. "You sure about that?" Vincent set down his broom and looked around the shop one final time. Every corner held a memory, every chair a story, every mirror a reflection of the man he'd tried to become. "I'm 94 years old, Tony. I'm tired of carrying secrets, and I'm tired of pretending I deserve the life I built on other people's graves." "But you do deserve it," Tony said fiercely. "Maybe not the way it started, but what you became, the father, the grandfather, the man who cut hair for 30 years and never charged a widow full price. That was real." Vincent felt tears sting his eyes. His grandson's forgiveness was perhaps the most painful gift he'd ever received, because it forced him to consider the possibility that redemption might actually be real. Maria appeared in the doorway, her face puffy from crying but determined. She'd been the strongest of all of them, somehow managing to hold her father's sins and her love for him in the same heart without letting either destroy the other. "Time to go, Papa," she said softly. Vincent took off his barber's apron for the last time, hung it on the hook by the mirror, and turned toward the door. As they walked out together, 3 generations of Torinos, broken but not shattered, he felt something he hadn't experienced since that February morning in 1929. Peace. Not the kind that comes from hiding, but the harder kind that comes from being known completely and loved anyway. The barbershop stood empty behind them, but the silence was no longer hollow. It was the quiet of a story finally, fully told,